Now we have learned so much about accessibility and that it is considered to be ever more relevant, and the potential is far from being tapped and exhausted. Hardly any better knows more about this than John Sage. He is founder and CEO of Accessible Travel Solutions and Sage Traveling, which is one of the biggest operators in the US. It's a member of the World Travel Carousel. He is on all these floors of this world. A new prize, Fellow Weekly. You have been nominated as Tour Operator of the Year. And now you will brief us on the latest developments in accessible travel. Where are the biggest gaps, do's and don'ts, and how should the interplay between public sector and private companies? Well, the German interpretation can be found through the headphones on channel 1. If you have questions while listening, you can drop us a line online, or you can also take the microphone. John Sage, over to you.
Thank you very much. I did not have my translator in, so I hope nice things were said about me. I'm not sure. I'm John Sage. I'm CEO of Sage Traveling and Accessible Travel Solutions. I actually live in Texas in a German town that was founded by Prince Karl Salms of Braunfels, Germany in 1845. So I get to experience German culture on a daily basis, and it's great to be back here in Germany and get sort of the real authentic experience. I've been doing this now since I have been traveling with my wheelchair for about 25 years. In 2009, I founded my first accessible travel company. In 2014, I attended Destinations for All in Brussels. And what I've seen over the years is that the challenges that I started facing 25 years ago around accessibility information, the topics around accessible travel that I experienced and heard in 2014 largely haven't changed. I guess I would say that looking back, progress has been slow. And I don't see that changing unless we change the environment. And so but I do see it changing going forward. And so that's what I want to talk about today, is where things are headed. Because the decisions that you're making now are not based on the past, they're not based on the present, they need to be based on the future. And so from my perspective as a disabled traveler, as an accessible travel business owner, and as someone that works with many different travel associations, I think I have a perspective of where we're headed. And so that's what I really wanted to share with you today, where we're headed, and also specifically from the private sector viewpoint, because we've had so many good presentations on perspective from the public sector, but the private sector is absolutely needed if we're going to have progress.
You will need that.
I will. Thank you. So there's three parts of what I'll talk about today. One, is the travel industry currently accessible? How has accessibility progressed in the past? And how will it progress in the future? I was asked to provide some numbers here. And so there are a lot of numbers. We just saw the presentation that MMGY had put together, the study. I think the key number that is sort of universally applicable across sectors and across destinations is it's 20% of the population. That's enough. I think that one number should be enough to get businesses moving. It's 20% of the population. It's not 2% of the population. It's not just wheelchair users. It's a huge population. And when it comes to seniors, it's 50% of seniors. Seniors are the ones that have the time and money to travel, the ones that travel in off-peak periods, like we just saw in the previous study. They spend a lot of money. They would spend a lot more if accessible barriers were removed. They also tend to be attractive customer types, spending on average 30% more than other travelers, and they're very loyal. Once a person with a disability books with a business that meets their accessibility needs, whether it's a cruise line or a hotel chain or an airline, they come back again and again and again. So part one, is the travel industry accessible? Well, first we need to define what accessibility looks like for people with disabilities. And this concept has been around for a few years, and I find it to be the simplest, clearest way to think about accessible travel. It's the 3 pillars of accessible travel. This is what disabled travelers need at the fundamental level. So the first pillar is facilities, and that's what we often think about. We think about things like wheelchair ramps and wide doors and roll-in showers and other things like that. We think about physical facilities, but there's also digital facilities. So websites need to be built in a way that they are what's called WCAG compliant, WCAG compliant, which allows blind people to read and navigate those websites using screen reader software. So the first is facilities. The second is around customer service. That's policies, processes, and training. So a barrier related to policy would be when I go on a cruise ship and they say, you can't go on an accessible shore excursion unless you have a companion with you. That's a policy barrier, because at home, no one gives me that policy that I can't go into a restaurant without a companion. So why should I have to go on a tour with a companion? So that policy is the barrier. A process would be that when I rent a rental car and I want to rent hand controls, I can't do that online. I can rent a child booster seat, I can rent a ski rack online, but I have to find a phone number and call to get hand controls installed on that car so that I can manually operate that car. So that process is an extra step that I have to go through that feels like an accessibility barrier. And the last is around training. It's about it's not just the facilities, it is the person-to-person interaction. And so the customer service, the individuals in hospitality need to be trained to meet the needs of people with disabilities. So that's the second pillar, is customer service. The third, which was mentioned in the MMGY study, is the one that the industry does the poorest job of. The industry needs to provide better accessibility information so that people with disabilities can feel confident in their travels and make their decisions for themselves. It's just what we heard in the previous presentation. So what does that information need to look like? There's 5 requirements that we've found. It needs to be accurate, as in up to date and verified, not self-reported. It needs to be detailed, as in having measurements. It needs to be clear, as in having photographs. It needs to be comprehensive, so all parts of the journey, because if one part of the journey is not accessible, people won't travel. And it needs to be trusted. It needs to have a third-party verification or an international standard behind it, or a trusted name. It can't just be that the business just says they're accessible. That doesn't necessarily win the trust of people with disabilities. And so these are the 3 pillars of what people need. And this is what it looks like in practice. These are some of the accessibility barriers. I took a bunch of these photos. Those are cobblestones in the Colosseum, hills in Puerto Rico, the stairs are in Pompeii, the steep ramp is in Istanbul. That's an accessible hotel, according to one of the OTAs. And you can see that it's very steep, and they conveniently put a potted plant at the top just to make it even more difficult. And so these are some of the things that we run into. We run into these problems as we try to travel. And so there's fear around this. There's anxiety around this. And so the accessibility information helps people know where to navigate and overcome that fear. And so it's so essential. Here's another example of information. So this is from a major brand website. I won't say which one. It doesn't really matter because they all look sort of like this. This is what the accessibility information looks like. It's a bunch of bullet points. There's no photographs. There's no measurements. It says electronic room key. I'm just reading things off here. It says entrance to fitness center is accessible. What does that mean? Does that mean that there is a ramp instead of steps? Does that mean there's a wide door? Does that mean there's a motion-activated door, a button-activated door? What does that mean? And so this vague information is self-reported by the local franchise to the hotel chain, and this is what gets published. And it just doesn't, it's not detailed enough. And so, it's vague. There's no measurements. There's no photos. It's self-reported. What needs to happen, it needs to be vetted. Whether that's by the hotel chain itself, by one of the OTAs or booking engines, or by a destination. It needs to be vetted somehow to know that it's accurate. Marketing. Marketing's not one of the 3 pillars, but I had to add it because it's so It's so important. Let me ask you, think about this. Think about, okay, when was the last time you saw a travel ad? I'm sure it's within the last week you're at a travel conference. When was the last time that you saw an accessible travel ad? And I don't mean something that just shows somebody in a wheelchair. I mean something that says, hey, we're accessible. Here's why we're accessible. Come book with us. What I'll say is that even though I own 2 accessible travel companies, I go to about 12 conferences a year, and my digital footprint says if anybody in the world should be marketed to and advertised to for accessible travel, it's probably me. Even though it should come to me, I receive almost no accessible travel ads. And think about that. Think about 20% of the market is not being advertised to. That's really just incredible. To me, that one fact illustrates how overlooked this demographic is. There's no active marketing. It's very reactive. It's, okay, communicate your disability needs and then we'll try to accommodate you. And that just doesn't work very well. The marketing needs to be advertised. It needs to be active. And then here's another question. When was the last time that you saw a major company announce an accessibility investment? Some big change. One of the hotel brands or one of the cruise lines or one of the airlines. I can't remember one. And so you hear about announcements all the time about what they're doing, but when was the last time there's a big investment in accessibility? I don't remember it. So these are some of the advertising, marketing, communication gaps that exist right now. Okay, so that's where we are right now. Let's think about where have we come from? How has accessibility progressed in the travel industry? And this is, I joined the World Travel and Tourism Council in 2019, right before COVID. And the question I always asked myself and others, I said, why has accessibility in travel not progressed more? Why are there still these barriers out there? And so, is it a better business case? Do we need more numbers? Is that it? I think the 20% number should get the attention of every CEO, but when I say it, that doesn't necessarily move the needle. I don't think it's a better business case. I don't think that's what's really needed to move accessibility. Is it more research? I was involved in both of the MMGY studies. They did one in America, they did one in Europe 3 years later. And I asked the CEO of MMGY, Katie Briscoe, I said, after the first study came out, did you see any increase in business requests? Did anybody come to you and say, hey, we want to market to this demographic? She said, no. No, they did a great study, the first one in the US, but they didn't get any business out of it. And so I don't know that more research and more numbers is really what is going to move the dial in the private sector. I don't think that's the case. And again, the private sector has to come along. It's not going to be the public sector that it invests in changing the layout of accessible hotel bathrooms. That's going to be the private sector, and so we've got to get them involved. And is it more guidelines? So we work with a lot of different travel associations out there, and one of the tools in their toolkit is to issue guidelines. And so each sector, it's airports, it's airlines, cruise, destinations, business travel, sustainability, they issue accessibility standards or accessibility guidelines. In fact, a given hotel may receive different guidelines from a business travel association, from a hotel association, from a sustainability association, complaints from leisure travelers. And so they don't know what to do. They receive so many guidelines, and there's so many already out there that I don't think more guidelines is what we really need. I think the best that exists right now is a document that was created, UN Tourism helped spearhead it, and some other organizations. It's called ISO 21902. ISO 21902. It was developed by the ISO organization out of Geneva. They brought together 85 experts from 35 countries, I think. I can't remember the exact number, to work on it for 4 years. I have not seen any other association that's going to devote that amount of time and effort to do it. I think it's the best out there. I don't think we need more guidelines. I think there's enough guidelines to do that. So these are sort of the conventional wisdom is this is maybe what we need, but I don't think these are the answers. So why does accessibility progress? Why has it progressed in the past? There's three things. There's three observations that I've seen that causes an organization, a destination, or a business to grow rapidly in accessibility. The first is a personal connection to disability. It's somebody at an executive level that has a child with a disability or a parent with a disability or a friend with a disability, and they get it. What we often hear is that I didn't really understand accessible travel until I traveled with my friend with a disability, and now I understand. So the executives who are not traveling with disabilities, with people with disabilities, don't necessarily understand the three pillars. They don't understand the barriers, but the ones that do can make a rapid step forward. Now, this is not something that we have control over. It's fairly random, but it is a way that things progress. The second is more, you have to do it. So it's legal compliance or negative public relations. It's bad press release or a legal compliance. I'll say that in the U.S., and I'm not sure about every location, but in the U.S., we have the Americans with Disabilities Act that deals with the built environment, the physical facilities. However, it doesn't mention furniture at all. And so what happens, you go into an accessible room that is legally compliant, but the bed is too high. The bed is up here. I was in Philadelphia 2 months ago. It was an accessible room at a 4-star hotel, and the bed was this high. And so that happens. So legal compliance, being legally compliant, doesn't mean that you're necessarily accessible. And with all the different legal codes in different countries, these multinational corporations in hotels, it's confusing for them. So just being legally compliant is difficult, and it's something that they meet the minimum, but they don't go beyond it because it's so complicated. The last is where I see things changing. I think where it happens, where I've seen it really progress, is when the purchasing power of the able-bodied community comes into play. So what does that mean? So it's not John and his family traveling, and I go and I say, hey, I'll stay at your hotel if you provide this accessibility information, or I'll come back to your hotel if you fix these accessibility barriers. That doesn't really move the needle. But if you get an event organizer to say, hey, we'll bring our 5,000 person event to your city if you have 2 accessible hotels that have been certified and an accessible convention center and some accessible evening venues, that purchasing power of the able-bodied community will move the needle, not only in events, but also in business travel. And so that's what we're really talking about here is it needs to not just be tourism, it needs to be business travel, it needs to be events. That's how accessibility really progresses. And here are the ingredients, the 2 necessary ingredients. So when I do speak with executives on the World Travel and Tourism Council, what I found is that even in the largest travel companies in the world, there is not a whole lot of accessibility knowledge. If you ask, okay, well, how high up is your top person that deals full-time with accessibility? A lot of times it's a first-level supervisor that handles complaints or accommodations. There's not a strategy person up at a VP level or anything like that. And so the first ingredient is knowledge. It's accessibility knowledge, and we're getting that today, but there's a lot of executives that are not here today that don't really take the time to learn this accessibility knowledge. So accessibility knowledge is the first ingredient, whether that's through training or consulting that includes strategy development. The second is around accessibility tools. One of the things I say is you can't just train your way into accessible travel. There's no amount of training that's going to really deliver accessibility. And so it's accessibility tools. So a standardized assessment process to evaluate accessibility is needed. Certification is needed because accessibility is so complex. There's so many different things that can cause an accessibility barrier and can cause frustration for disabled travelers. And so what needs to happen, it's not just a one-page checklist. There's hundreds of things that need to be looked at because any of those things can cause a negative experience. The problem is that a lot of businesses either want to take the shortcut and do the one-page checklist, or the full assessment is too difficult, and publishing that information is too difficult. So a certification, an accessibility certification, is a key way to make accessibility, the complex world of accessibility, simple for event organizers and business travel managers to understand. And the last is software to help this scale completely across many different destinations and many different sectors. So how will it look in the future? I'm optimistic. I really am. I know I sort of speak kind of pessimistically about the progress being made, that has been made, but I think it's going to increase. I think it's going to move more rapidly. So before this year, we were involved in a lot of different associations. You can see here the World Travel and Tourism Council, and we helped write accessibility guidelines for UN tourism, different organizations in the events industry, the Global Business Travel Association, cruise, travel agents, airports, GSTC for sustainability, the World Sustainable Hospitality Alliance, different inclusion organizations, mainly in the US. And we're working with all of them to help them write accessibility guidelines and do training and things like that. But what we found, none of them were talking to each other about accessibility, which is why all the guidelines looked different. And so that was a problem. Now, what we are working on now, and it's coming, you're sort of some of the first to hear about this. It hasn't been announced publicly, but we're founding a global accessible travel alliance of these types of associations in tourism, business travel, and meetings and events so that they start talking to each other. Not only do they start talking to each other, but they start collaborating together. Well, we've heard from, I've spoken with software companies like Cvent and like Amadeus and others, and they say, we can build accessibility into our platform. It's technically feasible, but we need the demand first. And so it's a little bit of a chicken or egg issue is, do you get the supply developed first, or you get the demand first? And each is sort of pointing their finger at the other to say, hey, you do it first. Well, if we get everybody talking together and collaborating, I think this can change. I think it will say, okay, the event organizers are getting trained, they know what to ask for, the software is going to help increase the amount of these places that are certified, and so now we'll start working. And as we get some alignment there, it will result in standardization, simplicity, and clarity. And that's where businesses invest. They need standardization, simplicity, and clarity in order to make the investments. So this is the last slide. It's how to benefit. And I know we've got a lot of public sector and some private sector here. But continue to address the 3 pillars. Continue to address all 3 pillars. Support private sector and public sector collaboration and alignment. So it can't just be the destinations talking to each other. We've got to get the private sector involved, and the public sector needs to make sure that they come along. And then also align with global cross-sector, multi-disability standards and certifications. Because for businesses to invest, they don't want to do one thing for wheelchair users over here and another thing for neurodivergent there and another thing for vision here. They want the ROI. And so it needs to be a comprehensive investment. That's the best way to get the high return on investment. And so with that, thank you very much.
John Sage, herzlichen Dank.
John Sage, thank you so much, John Sage, for this highly inspiring keynote. I think you have triggered so many ideas and comments and follow-up questions. Hila Nais will join you and hand over the handheld microphone to the online viewers and listeners. There was briefly an interruption on the German channel. Wisely enough, you switched to the English channel, but now we have all 3 channels up and running as they are supposed to. Now I don't see any hand yet, no comment in the chat. Any questions, comments, follow up? To reinforce what John has just been telling us, here up front, there is a question. It's more a comment. I am a tour operator myself. For more than 20 years, we have been organizing travels for people with disabilities. This has been a highly motivating talk because I can share so many of your experiences. On the one hand, you get the feeling, okay, one lives in another world. Well, to link up different partners, it was exciting to see that organizations that considered accessibility rather a sort of hindrance or impediment, then they started seeing this as an opportunity. I'm talking about huge hotel chains, cruise ships. It's just about the spark that ignites the movement. Therefore, anybody who is directly concerned or somebody who instills this idea, but not just with demands, but with an encouraging message. Hey, let's get it into going together. I think you have been brilliant in representing this. Thank you very much. So, huge inspiration that the voice is spread. It's people more than anything else. It's about setting the spark. Complaints about airlines in the stream. How can airlines improve in dealing with these requirements? And what are the rules to make your claims valid?
So around airlines, and again, this is back, I remember around 2014 at Destinations for All hearing about the things that were soon coming in airlines. And so the two biggest requests that people, at least wheelchair users, have is they want bigger bathrooms and they want to be able to stay in their wheelchair during the flight. Not everybody, but I'm comfortable transferring to an airline seat, but some people have, they can develop pressure sores and they have electric wheelchairs that have special cushions that make it safe. And so what has been talked about is, what has been said is that there's a technical requirement is that it's not safe to strap down wheelchairs in the event of a crash. And so that's what they're saying, oh, we have to fix this first. I think that's a concern, but I do not see any airline. So the issue is these wheelchairs, particularly electric ones, are wider than the airline seat. So you would need to take out 2 airline seats to fit 1 wheelchair. And I don't see any airline voluntarily doing that because you're talking about losing 1 paying passenger all day, and 365. And so what's that cost? That's a lot. And so from a shareholder standpoint, I don't see that happening voluntarily. I think it will require regulation for that accessibility barrier to be solved.
Und ich glaube, die Frage war auch noch, wo kann man sich melden, wenn es irgendwie
Other question, where can you report any complaints or any impingements of norms and standards?
So the question is where to report that. That's a really good question because there's not sort of a disability complaint line that exists globally. I know that even in my hometown, when I see the parking spaces are painted incorrectly. There's a restaurant that we love to go to. The accessible parking space is on a slope like this. And so I can't easily get in my wheelchair. My wheelchair will roll away and I'll end up on the pavement. But there's nowhere to report that's easy. In airlines, I think it's probably the same. I think you can report it to the individual airline. I don't know if reporting it to any associations, I don't know that would work. And so this is part of the problem is it's not up to people with disabilities to be the police on accessibility. That's not what we want to do. It doesn't happen for any other demographic. And so that's why we need the businesses to take a lead. I wish I had a better answer, but I don't.
Dankeschön. Weitere Fragen? Bitte, hier vorne geht die Hand hoch.
Further questions? There is a hand raised up front. Thank you very much. First, I wonder, in all this, we are talking so much about knowledge, knowing what we need and that we need to share with the world. Back to the point that we addressed a while ago. This knowledge, if I have to spend 2,000 euros to buy this study, this is the first barrier because nobody will stash out 2,000 euros to buy knowledge. Knowledge must be easily accessible and must be free. Looking at the ENAT website, I do not find this study. on the website of the ENAT. We must find pathways how to share information, our knowledge, easily to other people. I'm not really familiar with those studies. Open access publishing is certainly an option even in the tourism industry, I would say. This is a question rather to Mr. Hickel. Yes, that's exactly the point. We need the knowledge. We need the knowledge and the expertise, but if it is not accessible, if this is not accessible, I think these are two different types of things. Well, these are very detailed brochures. Yes, you are right in pointing this out. Information must be freely accessible, not only vague, but very precise, to the point, well documented, and good retrievable, well retrievable.
Any of these accessibility guidelines, whether it's the Americans with Disabilities Act or other national codes, they are freely available, but they're hundreds of pages long. It is difficult to just sort of assimilate this and learn it. And that's why we need the tools and the education. We developed the Sage Accessible Travel Academy for event organizers, destination managers, hospitality, tour guides, travel agents, to do that, to sort of disseminate all this very complex knowledge down to an easier level to understand. I mean, we have to charge for it because it does cost money to develop, and we don't have any governments paying for what we do. But it's a good return on investment. We feel we've seen that before.
Und Sie haben sich ja auch beteiligt an dieser Studie, also haben auch beigetragen.
You also participated in this study. You contributed to it, so it is important to do these international things. Are there any further questions? There
Zwei
is
Fragen,
a
genau. Ich
hand in
glaube,
the back.
Sie waren
Two
zuerst.
further questions. I think you were first.
I had a question. I'm from Australia. We have a building code, which is a requirement around new buildings. Let's say, anything to do with the physical environment needs to be to reach a certain level of accessibility within the code. And then we have, with the ISO standards that you were talking about around accessible tourism, and there's different guidelines and checklists put forward by different states, and they all vary. So there's all a whole lot of different requirements that need to be met in order to get certification. And there are these organisations popping up, usually businesses, who are offering a type of certification or accreditation. But there's no consistency here. How do you think we can do that? I know the ISO doesn't have detailed metrics in it. It talks about good practice and it talks about how to provide barrier-free experiences, but it doesn't get into the nitty-gritty. It doesn't give you dimensions, for example. How do we standardize that?
Yeah. So the ISO 21. First, thank you for the question. The ISO 21902 refers to another ISO standard called 21542, if I'm not mistaken, that does have those specific details. But you're exactly right, is the lack of standardization is difficult. If these big brands have to adhere to international standards and local laws, national laws and local laws, that becomes very difficult. And so they want to just do the minimum because it's too complicated to go beyond that. What we did, and this was far more difficult than I expected, is I had a team of people reviewing accessibility laws from around the world to try to harmonize those so that we could build them into our SAGE best practices. And we feel that ours is as good as anything out there. I don't know anybody else that's spent that time. It's terribly boring to read through all those laws and guidelines. So we tell everyone, hey, rather than develop your own standards, look to ISO 21902 and 21542. But if you do want to harmonize, which it makes investment possible, we think that our SAGE best practices really help there.
Okay. Eine letzte Frage war da hinten noch. Ein Arm ist gerade hoch.
One last question in the back. There you go. I am a representative of ENAT, and I would like to clarify one thing. The study cannot be bought from ENAT. ENAT was not strongly involved in the study. We placed advertisements with persons affected to increase participation. And when it comes to ENAT's donations that ENAT gets, here's the situation. If authors want or generate profits with the study, which is everything but clear, then parts of the profits are earmarked as donations for ENAT. And then earlier on, there was the question of where can you complain about problems when it comes to air travel. If this question referred to Germany or Europe, here's my answer. First of all, you have to turn to the airline, complain with the airline. And if you don't get a reasonable, satisfying answer, then we have the authority in Germany that is responsible for those airline-related complaints. All right, we will check where the study can be purchased. Okay, very last question for you, John. Where do you see us in Germany? How much have we as Germans achieved in the area of accessibility? What have you experienced in Berlin, for instance?
Sure. How is the accessibility in Germany? I'll say that when I want to come to Europe, if I call somewhere in Germany or in the Netherlands and I want to know how wide the bathroom door is, they tell me to the millimeter. If I do that in Southern Europe, they say, "Come on, we'll figure it out." It's sort of different. So I think the culture of Germany being very precise shows up in accessibility. So I think it's better than most places. I think that what we just heard about the German National Tourist Board and some of the work being done here is better than many places. I know that their goals to get more business into a database, and so it's not where it needs to go yet, but the first step is often the most difficult one. So I applaud Germany for really making so much progress already.
Okay. Herzlichen Dank, John Sage. Vielen Dank, dass Sie da waren.
Thank you so much, John Sage. This is your applause. Thank you so much for being here.